In a few minutes, Eddie Sheridan will set the stage for today's reading. I would like to highlight a few things before we start. This story is set in 1837, just 8 to 10 years before the Great Hunger. Even though the famine had not started yet, conditions were lining up for what we now commonly call the perfect storm: hunger, poverty, failed crops, and overpopulation, let alone the political implications. So today's Reader's Theater will take a look at the micro level, the common people. 2 people, 2 families, 2 different situations. The story is fiction, but the strife and dilemmas are real. We know that Kathleen's situation occurred more frequently than we would like to imagine, and her father's reaction is not a stretch at all. And in Connor's case, well, you be the judge of that. Let me introduce the readers and their roles. John O'Sullivan is the barkeeper, Michael O'Malley. Tim Madigan plays a dual role, Captain Ryan, and the evil Sergeant Sean Clark. Art Smith is Da. Kathy Russell is Ma. Ed McCarthy is Connor Meehan. Mike McCarthy, Connor's brother and Mr. Bailey. Chris McCarthy, Kathleen O'Grady. Catherine McMahon Flynn is Emma. Tim McCormick is the dual role of Patty O and Sergeant Clark. And behind me is Eddie Sheridan. He is the narrator. Kushal McCree will be playing the music. That's Kathy McGrath, Pat Carey, and Mary Lester. By the way, please silence your cell phones. Sit back, relax, and let yourself be transported to County Clare in 1837.
Flight of the Wretched, Part 1, The Means. In 1607, the chieftains of Ireland were forced to leave their homeland as a result of the continued onslaught of the Elizabethan forces. This exodus was known as the Flight of the Earls, and the result was the new Protestant ascendancy whereby English lords replaced the old Gaelic culture. Even though the chieftains were defeated and gone, the common Irish people remained, principally as farmers. Throughout the next 2 centuries, their labours were now in the service of the new absentee landlords and sitting royalty, a hard truth to accept. By 1837, the land was crowded and depended upon a single source of nourishment, the potato. At this point in history, the stage is nearly set for one of the greatest social, political, and humanitarian disasters of all time, the Great Hunger on Gorta Moor. This story focuses on 2 people situated in the middle of these troubled times. With no viable future in Ireland and with their backs against the wall, they set out on a journey full of fear, separation, and uncertainty. Their faith, courage, and moral code guided them to a course of a new life, the flight of the wretched. The future is rarely planned with great detail, and it can change in moments. Such was the case for Connor Meehan, a 20-year-old Irish lad struggling to survive amidst the crowded lands across Ireland. Tonight, an unexpected incident would change one offshoot of the Meehan clan forever. The flow of events started with dinner, when the family gathered, as they had for generations. In spite of the lack of food and a sparse dinner, it was a time for all the Meehans to draw together.
I remember that night. Da sat at the head of the table, as the children lined each side, and Ma took her place at the other end. It did not matter if the children were fully grown adults or tiny tots. Their place was at the side of the table until they established their own home. The meal was always the same during these hard times. Ma selected potatoes from the storage bin that showed the least amount of decay. But it was the staple of each evening meal, and the supplies were bleak from the last year's blight and overly damp storage. Even though most of the potatoes were unfit for normal consumption, these were tough times, and she carefully selected soft and barely usable potatoes and boiled them in water. The result was a dinner that fed 5 adults and 5 growing children. When it was ready, Ma dished out everyone's portions. For the limited amount, she plopped down two small potatoes on Father's plate, as he received the healthiest looking potatoes, followed by the two youngest getting the next healthiest. My older brother Frank and his wife, who was with child, received the next portion. I was the last to be served before Ma took her share. My serving was soft, discolored, half-rotten potatoes, and as I picked apart the soggy skin to expose the interior flesh of the crop, I saw a black core surrounded by an edible white layer.
Maybe next year we'll be better cooks.
Let's pray for it. No, Da, you need the strength, I said. Both of us knew Ma would not allow Da to give up his portion anyway. I picked around the black blight, trying to find a nutritious bite, and after 2 attempts on each spud, I pushed the plate away. I'd rather eat the dirt in the field than these.
Connor, don't whine. Be grateful you have something to eat in front of you.
Complaining was not allowed, so I went back to dissecting my meal. Ma suffered the most, but said the least. Her portion was the remainder of the pot after the family was served. Even though her good health was vital to the family, the meals were barely sustainable food. We drank tea from a collection of leaves in the bottom of the kettle, and the leaves were reused at each meal until devoid of all flavor and effect before a fresh batch of leaves was added. However, the fresh leaves were not that fresh, mostly leftover tea leaves from better days. Our diet was simple, sparse, bland, and lacked nutrition, as it was through most of West Ireland, with little hope of improvement.
After dinner, Connor broke the quiet.
I'm going down to Michael O'Malley's tonight and have a pint with the boys. I heard the English might send food for the starving and struggling people. I don't know if it's true, but I'd like to find out.
How will you be paying for a pint? We can't afford food, and you want to drink at the pub? Are you going to ask Michael for credit?
I helped Brian McPherson fix his wagon today. He couldn't pay me, but he said he'd buy me a pint tonight.
If he couldn't pay you, how is he going to buy you a drink?
Ma,
Let the boy go. You never know what you might find. And none of your shenanigans.
Ma,
O'Malley's pub was cold on this cool Monday in February, and the talk was sharp. It was desperate talk of survival for today, tomorrow, or a year from now. The chatter was laced with hatred for the English that dominated every aspect of Irish life.
Those damn British are going to let us starve to death. They could care less if our children are dying. They hope to weed out the weak, the elderly, and let the population right itself. They don't care who lives and who dies.
And as if cued, the fierce British enforcers of the British throne entered the bar. Sergeant Peter Clark entered with his usual arrogant posture, hoping for some hot-tempered Irish lad would let his tongue get ahead of his ability to filter his good sense. Any reaction by the bar's patrons would be cause for a brutal response from the British soldiers that would demonstrate their cruel control of the population.
I have terrible memories of that night. Sergeant Clark walked to a table where Seamus Burke, Tony Fitzgerald, and 2 of the McNeil boys, Jack and Tom, were sitting. Sergeant Clark had been assigned to County Clare for over 2 years. By now, he should have known better than to start trouble when those 4 boys were together. When they started drinking, anything could get broken, including bar stools, windows, arms, or legs. But now, Sergeant Clark miscalculated. 4 boys had grown considerably in the last 2 years, and in the process, they had gotten stronger, and more sophisticated about when and how to fight. Clark stopped at their table and looked directly at Burke, then insulted Seamus by saying,
Did your mother steal any potatoes today?
It was an attempt to ridicule Burke and all the Irish, and everyone knew it. Everyone also knew the stage was set. Seamus Burke looked at Clark, but Tony, Jack, and Tom each directed their looks to the other three soldiers and sized them up.
Now, we're not going to have any trouble in here today. You boys, mind your temper. And Mr. Clark, if you don't mind, we've done nothing wrong. Everyone is behaving.
Sergeant Clark gave a slight turn to smile at O'Malley's feeble attempt to bring order. That slight distraction was all Burke needed. Burke was on the move, out of his chair, dragging his hand behind him to hook the back of the chair into his grasp. Once hooked, the chair rotated like a wheel, spinning towards the unsuspecting sergeant. Tony, Jack, and Tom moved horizontally, heading straight for the three soldiers.
Ordinarily, three soldiers would be quick enough to react to the charge. They did not see Sean Clark lead the assault from their left flank, a tactical mistake that would cost each of the soldiers more than a few teeth and several days of recovery. The surprise attack happened with speed and precision. The soldiers' long guns were quickly batted away, turning the fight into hand-to-hand combat. The four youths had speed, strength, surprise, and most effectively, emotion on their side. Now, Seamus Burke was a brawler, and the years of his personal and family oppression had accumulated deep within his soul. The pent-up emotions from his father's death at the hand of the English enforcers, the forced loss of family land that led to reduced crops and frequent hunger, the stripping of his native language, and prohibition against practicing his Catholic faith, all accumulated in this moment. Today's abuse, like the harassment his family had received in their daily comings and goings, was now focusing in one central point. This aggressive, arrogant sergeant in front of him represented all that personal history, and the fire of frustration and humiliation felt deep within his chest, at that second exploded into fury.
Seamus lost control. He had knocked the sergeant back with the force of the revolving chair. As soon as the chair struck, Seamus let go of his grip, and the chair fell, covered with the fresh blood from the sergeant's head. He then planted his feet in a strong fighting stance as his left fist came with blazing speed to the sergeant's jaw, causing bone and teeth to break and splitting his lower lip, sending more blood splattering across the floor. Clark stumbled to gain his footing, but Burke sent a flurry of punches to the face and head. Peter Clark went down, and Burke's assault continued. Clark never regained his footing or his composure. Within 4 minutes, the fight was over, and the sergeant lay on the floor motionless.
The sergeant's brain could not withstand powerful blows coming from the left and right side repeatedly, and finally his brain function shut down.
Holy Jesus and Mary, Mother of God, he's dead?
The other three soldiers had been beaten and stripped of their weapons.
Seamus Burke and the other boys ran off.
Sean Clark and the other Irishmen looked at each other, wondering what to do, as each man knew the trouble that would follow with the British forces.
I'll go for Dr. Zimmerman.
Two other men volunteered to go with him. Connor immediately left the pub. He ran home as fast as his legs could move. He continued directly to his brother's cottage because he couldn't face his parents with such upsetting news. He pounded on Frank's door until he woke him up.
Frank, there's been a terrible event at O'Malley's place tonight. I have to leave.
What happened?
The less you know, the better. However, one soldier was killed and 3 others were badly beat. Tell Don Ma I had nothing to do with the fight or the killing. But because I was there, I have to leave. Frankie, I'm going to catch the next boat out.
Where will you go?
I don't know. I'll take the first boat I can. I just hope it's not a boat for London.
Frank's wife Emily came into the kitchen to ask what was going on. Connor walked over and gave her a hug.
Goodbye, Emily.
She did not realize it was a final goodbye. Connor turned and walked to his older brother, whom he had loved and respected for many years. He patted Frank on the shoulder. Those were the last words he said to his family as he headed out the door and hustled down the lane in the darkness, never to see his home again. Part 2, the O'Grady family. The O'Grady family had lived in Ennis, County Clare for centuries, working the land, but currently Paddy O'Grady was working the people. O'Grady was a merchant who imported tobacco. He was well known throughout County Clare as Paddy O. His oldest daughter, Kathleen, had her father's command of the language, but she chose not to be a verbal hawker in the image of her father. She was more like her mother, Emma, than her father, reserved and respectful of people's time and personal thoughts. Her presence sparked life through her large smiles and her lovely face. Her striking good looks naturally drew people in for an engaging conversation. Kathleen also played violin. In the evening, she would play the soft music of Thurlock O'Carolan. Kathleen worked as an aide at the County Fever Hospital in Ennis. She assisted with the daily chores of cleaning and changing bedpans and giving sponge baths to patients. She also ran errands and delivered messages. She wanted to study in the health field, but women doctors were nearly unheard of, so her best option was to consider joining a convent that cared for the sick. Her 18th birthday was soon approaching, and a final decision had not been made regarding her life's vocation. She was well liked by the hospital staff as well as the patients. Most patients at the hospital were short-term because the fever would quickly overtake them. Kathleen gave them as much comfort as she could and tried to provide an environment in which they could die with dignity. On a cool, cloudy and dark November evening in 1836, Kathleen left the hospital for her usual walk home through the streets of Ennis.
It was an awful night. I was about 2 hours later than usual because I sat with Edward O'Donnell during his last hours of his earthly existence. After he passed, and I reported the event to the charge doctor, I left for home. I was sad for the loss of Edward, an older man who possessed a vigorous spirit throughout his sickness. I felt as if I had lost a friend, which left me in a melancholy mood that made me keep my head down, lost in thoughts of Edward's final struggle. As was my custom, I walked past Callahan's pub. The typical crowd could be heard from the street, bantering and sharing the talk of the night. but I ignored the bar's activity. Shortly thereafter, I heard footsteps behind me. The footsteps kept pace with me even as I quickened my step. The click of my followers' heels I could easily hear against the stone walkway, and fear grew within me. I thought the heavy footsteps were that of a fully grown man, so I decided to turn abruptly on a side street to see if I could get a look at my follower. I could only make out a large shadow and could not identify the person. Now, I was on a small street with a couple of shops that had closed for the day, and the area was desolate. The footsteps now became a run. I had only a few short seconds to decide what to do, but it was too late when an arm wrapped around my neck and a hand was pressed over my mouth. I had just reached the intersection of an alley, and he dragged me down the alleyway, pushed me to the ground. There, in this alley of Ennis, County Clare, I was tragically desecrated in body and spirit by one of the highest crimes against humanity. I was left alone, abused, torn, disheveled. I gathered my tattered underclothing as I sat up and tried to regain my composure. My coat was soiled, but my aide's uniform was still intact. The physical pain and the emotional trauma overwhelmed me as I sobbed, trying to catch my breath. I slowly stood up and waited. I listened with fear for others who might come to call of my assailant and take advantage of this powerless girl in the isolation of the alley. I looked down the alley, and I knew I did not want to return that way. I looked in the other direction, which was a longer distance back to the main street, but I was in shock, not sure of my location. I stumbled towards the longer, unknown direction. With a deep breath, my senses sharpened, and now I could hear sounds more clearly. The smell that stuck in my nose reeked of alcohol and sweat. My mouth was dry, and I felt dirty, soiled by that crime that clung to my skin and invaded my soul. By the time I limped and staggered up the alley and reached the main street, I was able to stand fully upright. I brushed off my clothes, again gained control. With that, I started my trip home.
Kathleen stood in front of her house. Having to tell what happened would be difficult indeed, and her father would react with great anger and shouting, questioning how this could happen. He would want to organise a posse to roust anyone with alcohol on his breath, not to mention a commotion he would create in Callahan's pub. Kathleen's mother would be devastated as well as her sisters at the crime that took place. In the end, Kathleen decided to say nothing. She entered the roadhouse and walked the stairs to her second floor residence. Upon entering the apartment, Emma, her mother, was the first to greet her.
Kathleen, you are late. Is everything all right?
Yes, everything is all right. Edward, an older man, whom I liked, died today. I stayed with him until the good Lord took him home.
Emma smiled, proud of her daughter. Kathleen went to her room to change and clean up. When she returned to the living room where the family was gathered, again Kathleen's mother sensed something was wrong.
Something's bothering you.
It was a statement more than a question.
It's just the loss of Edward. He was such a good man, and no family was there for him.
As days passed, Kathleen continued her daily routine of going to work and walking home. She was careful not to stay late, and she took the longer route home away from Callahan's pub. She was a strong woman, but she had pride and she hurt. The walk home and that fateful night past Callahan's pub could have destroyed Kathleen's spirit, but such was not her nature. Kathleen had an internal strength that she did not let a horrendous crime defeat her true self. She suffered internally, but endured externally. She never wanted to see or hear of Callahan's pub again. As Christmas 1836 approached, Kathleen's worst fears became reality. She feared she was pregnant. How would she explain this circumstance to her family? As a good Catholic, being pregnant out of wedlock would overshadow any explanation of the crime that happened to her. Her father would not understand, and the scandalmonger's talk of the townsfolk and parishioners of the Cathedral Church of St. Peter and Paul could not be endured. She waited as long as she could, but by the end of January, she was certain of her condition. Kathleen waited until after church on the last Sunday in January to tell her parents. Her two younger sisters were out of the house visiting their friends when she determined it was time for a talk. Paddy was sitting in his chair enjoying one of his cigars.
I think I'm pregnant.
What?
Who?
Yes, it's true. I think I'm pregnant.
Who is the father?
It does not matter who the father is. I will not marry him.
I want to know who he is. He will pay for this baby and his indiscretion upon my daughter.
Daddy, it does not matter.
Are you serious?
Now his voice was loud, and all the occupants of the building and many on the street could hear Paddy O starting his verbal confrontation. He was on his feet.
No young man is going to take advantage of my daughter and walk away without anyone saying anything.
Kathleen was just about to reaffirm how little the identity of the baby's father mattered when her mother interrupted her.
Patty, lower your voice.
His face was flushed with red, and the veins were bulging across his forehead and along his neck, but he quickly redirected his thoughts.
What are we going to do?
Kathleen took note of the statement, which included the word we.
Father, we are not going to do anything. I'm going to have the baby, and that's that.
No, we can't have you living here, pregnant with a baby out of wedlock and say nothing. I have a business up to uphold. Customers need to respect me.
Paddy O's voice was up again for all to hear as he continued.
I had built this business so I wouldn't have to dig dirt for a living. I have given you a house with a roof over your head and food on the table and a respectable place in the church.
Patty, calm down. We need to talk this through in a civilized manner.
Well, I can't believe this.
As you were saying, you think you're doing perfect.
I will have the baby by myself.
Silence fell across the room. All three minds were churning. Each O'Grady was searching for answers, for words to be said aloud, for a strategy to be stated that brought solace, comfort, or a positive outcome.
I have a plan. We will send you away to stay with the Magdalene sisters during this period, and they will take care of you and help you with your baby.
No, Dad, I will do no such thing.
Paddy's eyes narrowed, his face reddened again, his body filled with intensity. He was ready to explode. Kathleen saw it coming. He rarely lost his composure, but when he did, it was volatile. In his thoughts,
I could feel the rage within me. I had built this business, and I had a reputation to think about. All of Ireland was suffering from disease, hunger, fever, land stripping, and abuses from the English. Amid all that misery, well, I had used my savvy and business skills and established a viable trade through shipping and importing goods. an unusual success for a Catholic to deal effectively with Protestant customers. In Irish terms, I was a success. A scandal like this would destroy all that I'd worked to create, and I had no intention of letting this happen. Now, I'm face to face with my daughter, whom I love greatly, and I tried to restrain my anger, but the intensity still made me shout louder than I should have. You must go away! I have built this business, and I have a reputation to think about. I could hear my words. I was removing my daughter from our home. I was abandoning her.
He sat back in his chair. His own conflicts tore him up on the inside. The discussion was over. Each retreated to their private thoughts. The air hung heavy in the small apartment on the second floor of the O'Grady household. Kathleen withdrew to her room. She needed time to be alone, as she felt alone and deserted by her family.
How can father's priority be his business? How could he consider sending me to those terrible slave masters? To save his business and find the right answer for me and my baby.
The next day, Kathleen announced her plan to leave her parents. She would find a way to survive.
I have a plan to travel to America and have my baby there.
I have a friend who can get you there safely.
Unbeknownst to Kathleen, Paddy O sent a dispatch to an associate in Cork City who handled his shipping business, asking for a special favour.
I have a dire emergency for which I need your help. My daughter needs to travel to America quickly and safely. Please ask Captain Ryan to grant this special request.
Paddy received his reply within the week.
Captain Ryan wants assurance that there is no legal troubles. Otherwise, he is leaving in 3 days hence. Oh my, 3 days!
He threw down the letter and called.
Kathleen!
Oh, Kathleen and her mother ran to a small office at the back of the apartment.
You must pack quickly and go to Cork for your transport. They are waiting to sail.
Kathleen's mother was not ready for such a quick decision on the departure of her firstborn child.
She cannot go this soon. Can't she wait for us to prepare a little better?
No, the ship is going to sail. I will accompany her to Cork and see her off.
Kathleen steeled her emotion against his dismissal of her so readily and dispassionately.
I'm prepared to pack my bag right now.
Her possessions consisted of a couple of dresses, some underthings, and her violin. She was finished with her preparation to travel to the New World within moments. But her mother could not handle the speed of events between the announcement of the pregnancy and Kathleen's departure, with the likelihood she would never see her daughter again. Emma could understand the rashness of a 17-year-old, but the dispassionate speed of Paddy to discharge his daughter was confusing.
I need to knit a blanket for the baby before you go.
Emma wanted some delay tactic, but she knew that Paddy's mind was made up. Neither reason nor emotion could change his course of action. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and she fought them back, a trait of internal strength that Kathleen had learned from her mother. Knowing that they were about to leave, Emma opened her arms to hug her daughter, an embrace that lasted several minutes with the whisper,
I love you. Godspeed on your journey.
I love you too, Mother.
Within 20 minutes of receiving the reply from the business associate, Kathleen and her father were off to Cork in a carriage arranged by Paddy. It was odd that Paddy, in trying to protect his reputation, turned to his business associates for help. Surely they would learn the nature of the dire emergency and the secret of his daughter's condition. In his fury to control events and make the decisions he felt necessary, he lost his business savvy and a true sense of the proper alternatives for his daughter. Kathleen, too, with her streak of stubbornness, had made snap decisions about leaving as a hasty reaction to her father's wrath. As the carriage rolled slowly towards Cork on the east side of County Cork, Paddy had plenty of opportunity to watch his eldest daughter across from him. He realised the talents of his daughter, now banished by her self-imposed exile, and he would miss her. He could not find the right words or the healing words to express his consternation with his daughter and even his own explosive reaction. Paddy glanced up at Kathleen, and the sight of her forlorn expression melted his self-loathing.
I am sad that you're leaving us.
Daddy, I'm scared.
An unusual statement from Kathleen, who rarely showed her vulnerabilities, but the realization of dangerous and distant travel suddenly came to the forefront.
Now, Katie,
A term he had rarely used since she had grown.
you'll be fine. And it's time anyways for you to be thinking of your freedom and leaving your parents' home.
You're right.
Kathleen was still troubled about her father not taking the future welfare of his grandchild into consideration, but to argue him would mean leaving Ireland with distressing memories. Nevertheless, she was disheartened by his lack of regard for her and the child as she slid lower into the hard bench of the coach, trying to find some comfort and ease the bumps of a rutty and potholed roadway. The remainder of the trip was either in silence or with guarded niceties about inconsequential views seen out of the carriage windows.
They say America is beautiful in the spring.
Yes, I'm sure it is. I'll find a nice apartment in the city, overlooking the harbor. It will make me think of home and times you took me to Limerick to watch the boats being unloaded with your tobacco and other goods.
Yes. I hope it doesn't rain as often.
They both smiled at the thought, and the conversation drifted into an awkward silence. Upon arrival at the docks along the River Lee in Cork, Paddy had one more piece of business to tend to with Kathleen.
The O'Grady's have a long history in County Clare, which I am very proud of. But I think you should drop the O in O'Grady so people in the New World will not automatically think that you are Irish.
Are you that ashamed of me?
No, that's not what I meant. I think people will accept you faster and might think that you're English or something.
And they might not think that we're related. And you were hoping that I would represent myself as English? Daddy, how could you?
Just drop the O for your own good.
Sure, Daddy. I'll drop the O.
She turned and looked out the window.
Another piece of abandonment.
The driver pulled up alongside a massive cargo ship, the Carolina. As he opened the carriage door, Paddy yelled in a gregarious voice,
Good morning, sir.
Ah, Paddy, I see that you made it in time. We're going to sail today as soon as we're loaded.
The captain left the gunwale and walked down the short gangplank to the dock. Paddy met him with hand outstretched.
Captain Ryan, I would like you to meet my daughter, Kathleen.
It is nice to meet you, madam.
Yes, sir. Nice to meet you, too.
I need you to get her to New York safely. She is with child, and the father is not known.
I see.
And please, give her this envelope when you arrive, and for your trouble, this is for you.
He placed a gold piece in the captain's hand.
She'll be safe with me.
Paddy O returned to his daughter standing alone in silent agony on the dock. In her private thoughts, she said,
How did it come to this? My father is handing me off to this stranger.
She looked at her father and saw a man who thought he was making the right decision for his daughter and family. Even though he had made his commitment to see her off, he stood there confused as to the next step and felt awkward in his movement towards Kathleen.
I wish you Godspeed on your journey.
Many blessings to you, Mother, Anna, and Grace.
I wish this could be different.
Paddy backed away with a step, turned, climbed into the carriage. When the door slammed shut, the driver yelled go, and the horses led the coach away. Kathleen stood motionless on the docks, staring at the departing coach when an urge to yell out.
Come back. Yet another emotion told me to hold my silence. Tears welled up in my eyes. All that I had ever known, loved, and become familiar with in my life was now gone. I felt overwhelmingly abandoned. My knees were weak, and I felt as if I would collapse at any moment. The air in my lungs felt shallow and vacant. In my moment of panic, tears rolled down my cheek, and I swallowed hard to suppress an outward sob.
Okay, let's get on board.
Part 3, the Carolina. Captain Ryan led Kathleen up the gangplank to the main deck. Another unusual circumstance was part of this voyage he had hired Connor Meehan as a sailor, even though the captain suspected that Connor had no sailing experience, especially when he tried to sneak on board as a stowaway. However, when caught, Connor convinced the captain he would make a good sailor. He turned his attention back to Kathleen.
This will be your home for the next 30 to 45 days. I have a berth set for you below for your privacy and living quarters. Mr. Bailey, take Miss O'Grady below.
It's Grady. I'm dropping the O.
Very well.
Mr. Bailey picked up Kathleen's bag and escorted her to the hatch and ladder that led to the lower deck. When below, he led her to her berth, a small cubicle protected by a cloth hanging on 3 sides to give her privacy. Within the enclosure was a small narrow bed made from freshly stuffed hay, a straight-back chair, and a small oval window with a hatch to let in some light.
I hope you're comfortable.
Mr. Bailey set her bag down and left. The cabin was clean, but the lower deck smelled musty, and the damp air blowing in from the porthole gave no promise of relief.
Again, a wave of melancholy hit me. Perhaps I, too, could end this voyage by insisting on going ashore. But no, stubbornness and determination overcame my fear, preventing me from making a quick exit off the boat. I sat on the chair for what seemed over an hour and looked about the tiny quarters, realizing this small area was the only refuge of isolation from a ship full of men. A different fear overcame me. Not the emotional fear of separation, but fear for my physical safety. Can the captain really protect me? I stood because some subconscious voice told me to run. Because as I did, the boat jerked. I heard voices above yelling.
Now drop the mizzen sail.
The boat was moving away from the dock, and there was nowhere to run. I was headed to America.
The ship set sail and Kathleen sat back down in the chair and stared out the porthole. The river gave way to the ocean, and soon the high waves of the open sea rocked the boat. Kathleen was oblivious to the changes until a sudden sway nearly knocked her to the floor. She could hear footsteps coming below and walking towards her. A deep voice spoke.
Miss Grady, Miss Grady,
Yes?
Miss Grady, are you all right?
Why, yes.
Kathleen pulled back the cloth opening.
Just checking. The captain would like you to join him for dinner tonight. Would that be all right with you?
That would be fine.
He will expect you at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock? How will I know when it's 6 o'clock?
The ship's bell will ring 5 times at 5 o'clock. The crew will change at that time, and it will ring again 6 times at 6 o'clock. The captain will be waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, okay.
Kathleen realized the awkwardness of the first mate. She took this discomfort as a result of having a woman on board. Then, at the tone of 6 o'clock, she left her berth and started towards the ladder to go above. She was surprised to find Mr. Bailey waiting for her by the ladder.
I will take you up.
Kathleen did not say anything, but did think it was odd that he was there. When she arrived at the captain's quarters, under the escort of Mr. Bailey, the captain motioned her to sit at his dining table.
I've asked a young lad to join us for dinner.
Before she could respond, there was a tap on the door.
Mr. Bailey, let him in, and then you can leave us.
Aye, Captain.
Connor entered the captain's quarters. Most sailors never see the inside of their captain's private quarters except in dire circumstances. As it turned out, the ship had not been a full day at sea, and Connor was making his second trip to the captain's berth.
Welcome, Mr. Meehan. I see that you've cleaned up after a hard day's work preparing for the sail.
The captain was trying to make his two guests feel welcome and comfortable.
Yes, I feel much better, thank you.
I would like to introduce you to Miss Grady. She will be traveling with us to America.
I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Meehan.
Connor first noticed her dark features. Her black hair and brown eyes had mystery behind them, but her smile had charm. Connor was taken aback by Miss Grady's beauty. He was disarmed immediately. His first word was,
Yes, it is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Grady.
You can call me Kathleen.
Well then, you can call me Connor.
dinner on a freight ship at sea in the 1800s was hearty fare, especially as guest of a captain. Tonight the evening meal was a bowl of salt pork and root crops, carrots and potatoes in a watery sauce. The captain's mood had led him to include the usual ship's fare of biscuits, known as hardtack, and goblets of beer. Dinner on this first night was exceptionally good. The company of other diners, or the fact that Connor had not eaten well for a while, may have helped the mood. Kathleen was delighted in conversation, and she spoke of her upbringing in Ennis.
I enjoyed the closeness of the neighbors and the many small shops.
Yes, I have been to Ennis a couple of times with my family. It's a lovely town. I come from Kilmallie, west of Ennis. We work the land.
Connor's reference to working the land told Kathleen that they were tenant farmers. Even though they had a close connection, both being from County Clare, the 6 miles from Connor's family farm was a long way from Kathleen's apartment in both status and lifestyle.
We had another crop failure this year. The potato turned black as it did before, and the government won't let us plant anything else for our own use. The only other choice is to convert it to grazing pasture land. It's a tough life right now for my parents and family.
Is that why you left?
No, not exactly. But there is no future for me in Ireland. Even if the crops were good, there are too many people working the land, too many mouths to feed. Soon enough, there will be widespread starvation unless the landlord allows other crops.
I believe it's the same all over the countryside.
Indeed it is. My cousins farther up the Shannon are struggling with the same issues.
I've asked Connor to keep an eye on it.
Why? Should I be concerned?
No, I mean, ships are dangerous places. They rock and heave. A storm can be very treacherous, and I will not have the time to watch over you.
I can take care of myself.
Kathleen, you are a woman on a ship full of men.
The captain's voice was serious, and Kathleen was well aware of the danger that lay in the hearts of men.
I understand.
If you need me, just say so.
Fear rose in my throat, and I felt a wave of anxiety overcome me. I took a deep breath and waited.
Connor watched a moment, sensing that something was wrong with Kathleen, but he was not sure of his meaning. Then Kathleen smiled and raised her glass.
To my protectors.
Kathleen and Connor had connected for their voyage across the ocean for a new and fresh start with life in America. The two were nearly inseparable for the 3,100 miles to New York Harbor. The ship sailed forward into the night.
I'll sing you a song of days long ago, when people from Galway and the county Mayo and all over Ireland came over to stay and take up a new life in America. They were ever so happy, they were ever so sad. Rolling in a new world, through good times and bad. All the parties and weddings, the Cayleys and wakes, when New York was Irish, full of joys and heartbreaks. On the subways, we ran those saloons, we built all the bridges, we played all the tunes, we put out all the fires and controlled the city hall. We started with nothing and went on with it all. They were ever so happy, they were ever so sad, to roll in a new world, through good times and bad. All the parties and weddings, the Cayleys and wakes, when New York was Irish, full of joys and heartbreaks. You travel from Kingsbridge to Queens or Midtown, from High Bridge to Bay Bridge, from uptown to down, from the east side to the seasides, sweet summer scenes. We made New York City our island of dreams. They were ever so happy, they were ever so sad, to roll in a new world, through good times and bad. All the parties and weddings, the Cayleys and wakes, when New York was Irish, full of joys and heartbreaks. I look at the photos now brittle with time, of the people I cherished when the city was mine. Oh, how I loved all those radiant smiles, how I longed for the days when they danced in the eyes. They were ever so happy. weddings, the Kayleys and Waits, but New York was Irish, full of joys and heartaches.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful. At this point, I would like to invite Neil and Honora, heading up. You can pick our raffle winners.
Oh, great. Better be mine.
We've talked today a lot about grief and sorrow, struggle and pain. One of our griefs is that we're losing this man from the board, and you can see why we're grieving. A special thanks to Michael for this wonderful Reader Theater. And could we also the readers? And a special, could we ask the presenters to stand? A special thank you to the presenters today for our whole day. Mary McCartney, Aaron Hart, Christine Camilleri, Kitty Corbett, Jamila Reagan, Dennis Bowden, and our wonderful musicians, Trishla McCree, Mary Lester, Kathy McGrath, and Pat Perry. And a final thank you to all of you for staying the course, because it's a long day. Thank you so much. It's been a great time. We hope to see you all again. God bless you all and safe home.